So, Sonic Unleashed is on computers now. I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with this development. Not satisfied with what emulation could bring, nor wanting to wait for Sega to remaster it themselves, a team of programmers got together and made a static recompilation for the Xbox 360 release of Sonic Unleashed, making it so, as long as you have the ISO and DLC files, you can play a port of Sonic Unleashed on your Windows or Linux computer. This game supports high-definition resolutions, ultra-widescreen, 60 frames per second, and beyond if you're willing to deal with some bugs, and it has mod support through the Hedge Mod Manager. As someone whose appreciation for Unleashed has only grown more and more since college, this recompilation makes me ecstatic, and as someone who cares deeply for video games, I can only see this as a win for video game preservation. It's been 17 years since Sonic Unleashed released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and in all that time, there has never been an official PC release. The only modern device that can run the game officially is the Xbox Series X, and in fact, Sonic Unleashed was the first game I played on my Series X. Unofficially, there have been attempts to run the game in emulators for the 360 and PS3, but results are often mixed and buggy despite the strides made. The closest we've gotten to a real PC release is Project Unleashed, which mods the daytime stages into Sonic Generations. Although it makes some compromises for Unleashed-specific mechanics, doesn't include anything beyond the main first act of each stage, and doesn't include any bosses, nighttime stages, or Eggman Land. Up until now, playing Unleashed was a game of compromises. You'd either play on aging original hardware that would struggle to run the more intense sections, play on emulators that required powerful hardware and weren't all there yet, play a mod more akin to a greatest hits album, or spend $500 on the one modern Xbox console that supports the game. The backwards compatibility of the Series X was the major selling point for me because I care a lot about game preservation. The prospect of being able to play older games I missed out on without having to track down the discs and hope the older hardware would run it is always appealing to me. The Series X is how I got to experience Panzer Dragoon Orta, Daytona USA, and Fallout New Vegas. Arkham Origins, which gets left out of the Batman Arkham bundles, is still playable on Series X. But for every Xbox game that is backwards compatible, there are dozens that aren't. And outside of the Xbox family, there are thousands of games quietly languishing on aging hardware. Jet Set Radio Future, for example, exists only on the original Xbox. It's supposedly backwards compatible on 360, although with notable performance hits. Lady Sia, a game near and dear to my heart, can only be played on hardware compatible with Game Boy Advance cartridges. For every Arcade Archives Bubble Bobble, there's a Tower of Druaga sitting quietly in a Tarpon Springs arcade gathering dust. For those games, emulation and, to an extent, piracy are their only saving graces. Their hardware is aging and increasingly difficult to track down, and the physical games are also aging and increasingly expensive. It was a big deal for Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door to finally re-release on Switch, specifically because your official prospects for playing the game were to track down a working GameCube and buy a used disc at an absurd markup. The last time I was looking for it, a loose, scratch-to-hell-and-back disc was being sold for $80. Most older games can only stay alive because of emulation and piracy efforts. Long-abandoned PC ports and emulators running copied ROMs are often the easiest and sometimes only ways to reasonably access old games. However, the more recent or niche the hardware gets, the more difficult it becomes to emulate its games. The Sega Saturn, for instance, is notoriously difficult to emulate even to this day, and emulators for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 are only more recently making advancements towards running smoothly. In bringing this recompilation project to fruition, the team behind Unleashed Recompiled made a tool to assist in recompiling other Xbox 360 games, opening the floodgates for future recompilation projects should fans find that emulation isn't serving their needs. Soon, we may just find that Project 06 isn't the only way to experience Sonic 06 on PC, and we may just get never-before-seen PC ports of other titles like Beautiful Katamari or the 2011 re-release of Daytona USA. While there are plenty of PC ports for games from this generation, not all games have been so fortunate. We can't rely on companies to fill the gaps with spotty availability because, unfortunately, maintaining access to old games rarely looks like a profitable venture if the games weren't already bestsellers. Since we're on the subject here, we'll use Sonic Unleashed as an example here. Sonic Unleashed released under the shadow of Sonic 06, making its attempts to establish a reputation an incredible uphill battle. While the daytime stages pretty much knocked it out of the park and became the basis for gameplay mechanics that still persist to this day, the slower spectacle brawler that is the nighttime stages made sure that the best the game could hope for was mixed reviews. It's no wonder this game was once delisted in an attempt to shore up Sonic's brand reputation, so it's also incredibly obvious why there hasn't been a remake or remaster attempt in nearly 2 decades. If it was ever going to happen, it would have happened when the game originally launched. For this and similar reasons, companies rarely deem the juice to be worth the squeeze when it comes to maintaining access to old games beyond their best sellers. That goes doubly so if there are any licensing or niche hardware considerations included in re-release efforts. And this is tragic. The circulation of old ROMs, as well as fan efforts to recompile or decompile old games, can often be the only reason a game still survives and gets any kind of reevaluation. It doesn't matter if the game sold poorly due to poor marketing, heavy competition with higher profile contemporaries, poor gameplay, or even just being misunderstood in its time. Hell, sometimes it doesn't matter if the game actually did sell well. Sonic Unleashed had a Platinum Hits banner on Xbox, and Sonic Heroes is widely considered to be a commercial success. Unless the game is that special combination of critical and commercial darling, the special combination of retro enough and easy enough to emulate, or owned by one of those companies dedicated to re-releasing old games, maintaining access on future platforms just isn't a priority. The original Mega Man games will always be accessible, and there will probably be yet another Sonic Generations remaster in 20 years. But for most games, you have to hope for the stars to align, that enough people will be vocal enough about the game that you care about for it to be made playable on modern systems. Most of that time, it doesn't get a re-release, and at that point, you just have to keep holding the candle for your favorite obscure game in hopes that people will see the passion and be inspired to pick up a used copy or dig into the emulation scene. A little fun fact about myself. The first time I fully played through a Mega Man game was on an NES emulator. I was in middle school, and Mega Man was in one of those low points where he wasn't getting anything new, nor was he heavily publicized. I vaguely knew about Mega Man. I saw him on t-shirts and YouTube sprite animations, but he didn't have the star he did in the 80s, nor the one he has today. But tween-age me, curious about the retro gaming scene, downloaded an emulator to run on my netbook, looked up one of those greatest NES games of all time lists, and downloaded the ROM for Mega Man off a shady site. I played through the entire game and became a Mega Man fan, and I've bought classic Mega Man games several times over now. I have the Legacy Collection. I had the weird PS3 re-release of Rockman 1, 2, and 3 for the PlayStation 1. I bought the Mega Man Collection for PlayStation 2 at a used game store, and I even bought Mega Man 10 when it came out on Xbox Live Arcade. But I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't been in the emulation scene and saw old ROMs circulated. I didn't have an NES, and hadn't noticed any compilations for the series in any of the stores I went to, especially because I didn't own a PlayStation 2 until much later. It's only because I was passionate enough about games to stumble into the retro emulation scene and had these games made widely and easily available to me that I gave Mega Man a shot. But here's the thing. You have to be deep into gaming culture to care about emulation and old games, and you have to care enough about playing old games in order to seek them out. EpicRomsForFree.com isn't part of the Nintendo Switch eShop, nor any other mainstream gaming storefront. So the average player, the casual enjoyer of games, does not get spoiled for choice in accessing or even knowing about retro games libraries. ROM sharing and emulation is part of preservation, but so are the ports, re-releases, and official emulators. Piracy may have made me love Mega Man, for instance, but the Steam store allowed me to fall in love with Knights. Positive word of mouth from Sega fans and a video essay from Shugels convinced me I had to play it, and it being readily available for purchase on Steam made it easy to do so. Except now it isn't available for purchase because Sega delisted it. So if you perhaps only recently became aware of Knights because of me or other fans, I guess you better hope that Sega Saturn emulation is up to snuff now because those used discs ain't cheap. Keeping old games in circulations allows new fans to find them even if they were born after the original release. It also allows more people to revisit the game and possibly even turn around public perception. Circling back to Sonic Unleashed, because the background footage certainly hasn't left that topic, it's only because of fans' persistence with the game that it's gotten the recompilation project and its critical perception has begun to shift. That backwards compatibility on Series X, and even the fact that the game was reprinted on discs for the Xbox One, means that more people got a chance to replay it. It means that younger, newer players got the chance to experience it outside of the shadow of Sonic 06 and enjoy the game in its own context rather than with the baggage of something prior. And hey, I'm a big fan of engaging with the game as it is instead of comparing it to the game you had in your head, so I guess now's the time to pepper in a review or at least a smattering of hot takes. The Werehog, and really a lot of things about Sonic Unleashed, are overhated. Don't get me wrong, the game has flaws. The game relies pretty heavily on QuickTime events, and oftentimes they're a little too quick. Like, I think even child me wouldn't have had the reaction time to properly execute the stealth takedown QuickTime events. I also think a lot of the daytime stages rely too heavily on beginner traps, and the drift is just nowhere near as tuned as Generations. But you know what I don't hate about the game? The medal progression. So many reviewers primed me to feel like the Sun and Moon medals were a chore to find, that you'd have to backtrack and scour every corner just to find enough to progress. So imagine how surprised I was when I never encountered that barrier. You see, the problem wasn't those wily game developers hiding medals in impossible to find corners. The problem was those silly reviewers not wanting to play as the Werehog or play anything other than Act 1 of each stage. When I simply played the extra acts and treated the Werehog stages like I would Bayonetta or any other spectacle brawler, I didn't have a problem. I played the game I had, instead of getting mad at it for not being a game I made up in my mind. And I never had to replay a single act. So let's talk about that Werehog or Hedgewolf or Wolfhog or whatever. 3D Sonic games have had an issue since their conception that an astronomical amount of work has to go into level design if you want it to last more than 30 seconds. I don't know if you know this, but Sonic is fucking fast, especially in those boost games, and given that 3D games are a lot harder to make tileable, repeatable assets for without feeling cheap, that means there's a lot of modeling and environmental design work that goes into making something that, at top speed, only exists on the screen for a couple frames. If it were just Sonic running through these levels, the game would only last 2 hours. That's not a joke, that's about my average playtime for Sonic's campaign in Sonic Adventure, even after dying and fucking up my cool tricks a bunch. That's how long it takes me to record a full playthrough of Project Unleashed, the literal answer to what an all-daytime stages, no padding Sonic game would be. Hell, if my life depended on me rolling credits on a fresh copy of Sonic Generations, I could procrastinate until noon and still beat the time eater before dinner. I'm not a fucking speedrunner, that's just how short the game is if you're decently competent as a Sonic player and don't have AP Calculus homework limiting your playtime to 45 minutes a day. If the game needs to last more than a couple hours, there needs to be some way to stretch it out. Sure, they could just put 30 more Sonic levels in to achieve a good length, if we're okay with the game taking 12 years to develop and Sega are cool funneling $1 billion into the level design and art departments. If we want a more reasonable solution, well then we're gonna have to be okay with some smart asset reuse. Now, the level design could get a lot blockier, and we could play a bunch of shorter, broken up stages that reuse a bunch of set pieces whole cloth, or rearrange the blocks to make a bunch of less interesting set pieces. But hey, that's exactly the part people didn't like about Sonic Colors and Sonic Forces. Or, I don't know, maybe we could all just be a lot cooler about extra characters who introduce new gameplay styles that allow us to re-explore the same or remix levels in a new context. Like, it kinda seems to me that Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 had the perfect fucking solution here, but instead of being chill about it and engaging with cool mechanics, a lot of us spent 2 decades convincing Sega it was wrong because 06 also did that. Mario Galaxy, and especially Mario Odyssey, are games where you play around with a lot of mechanics other than Mario's standard movement. But I don't see Nintendo getting red for filth over the manta ray surfing or that boss fight where you play as a tank. Why is there a subset of Sonic fans who believe that mini-games or extra gameplay styles are uniquely bad when Sonic does it? It's time to set the record straight here. I love SA1 Amy, I love the treasure hunting stages, and I fucking love the Werehog. Yeah, stat progression is a little wonky, but if you just focus in on that strength stat, you'll be golden, baby. Let's be real, the nighttime stages aren't any more button mashy than a typical spectacle brawler, but the difference here is that this is considered a reasonable critique of a Sonic game, but if I levied that same complaint against Bayonetta, the YouTube comments would rightfully skewer me. Yeah, you can eventually win if you just keep mashing the punch button and pray the enemy AI goes easy on you. And that's true in a lot of brawler games. These games are designed to let you throw out flashy combos and feel like a badass, but that also means the enemies are generous enough that they can be cheesed with lame, repetitive attacks. It'd be like insisting on going as slow as possible through the daytime stages. A lot of those turns and obstacles would probably be easier if you did that, but it feels lame as shit. You want to engage with the boost, the drift, and the quick step because doing that looks cool as fuck. But the moment the game throws an in-depth spectacle brawler at you that asks you to look slightly to the left or right of the main path, suddenly the Werehog killed your grandma. Maybe it's the fact that I love me some Bayonetta and Arkham City, or maybe it's the fact that I'm just not a fucking baby, but y'all did the Werehog dirty so many years ago, and that trash talk is the reason that this PC port never happened officially. And all that long-winded ramble really is just to say that keeping games accessible is necessary. We need these remasters, re-releases, ports, and fan preservation efforts because otherwise, so many games will just disappear. Sequels can sometimes overshadow previous entries or even fill the role that a port might have taken. What number Splatoon game do you think will be on before Nintendo decide that the first game is due for a legacy remake? Personally, I don't imagine we'll ever see a reissue of Mario Party 6, my favorite entry in the Mario Party series. Poor sales, misunderstood reputation, or even just being made for special hardware can leave a game to die on decades-old consoles. How many of you have played Super Magnetic Neo? Are we ever actually going to get a Sonic Rush collection, or does the dual-screen gameplay require too much reworking and rethinking to even bother attempting a port? And even if the game did everything right, licensing, or even just lack of interest from the company means that sometimes the only way to play it is to sail the seven seas. If someone wants to play the original Crazy Taxi, for instance, where are they supposed to get it now that it isn't for sale anymore? But anyway, that's all I have for this video. What's the game you're holding out hope for finally being re-released? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll watch again in the next video. Also, that Werehog's got that video game jelly. I love when character models have that video game jelly.